Hello, and welcome to the Risk and Accounting Advisory Podcast. I'm Neal Beggan, Cherry Bekaert's leader of our risk advisory practice. And today on our podcast, we are going to focus our discussion on risk and data management. In this digital age that we live in, it's imperative to manage your organization's data, looking at policies and procedures, as well as best practices to maintain the integrity and performance of the data, systems, and organization. Helping me and joining me today is Alan Swan, Managing Director in Cherry Bekaert's Risk Advisory Practice and a leader of our Risk and Data Management Solutions Group. Al, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, good pleasure to be here.
All right. Al, as you know from our prior podcast series, the Risk and Review, we typically keep it to 5 key questions, try to keep these very brief. With as vast a topic as we are going to cover today, we thought we'd break the rules a little bit and go beyond the 5 standard questions. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Al, in a highly technology driven world, let's start today's conversation by looking at the continuous digitization of the business operation. And my leading question to you is, based on that, what is the impact on small and medium-sized banking institutions?
Well, digitization is a baseline in the use of digital technologies and of data in order to create revenue, improve business, replace transformation business processes, and create an environment for a digital business whereby digital information, the information that comes out of those systems, is core of the banking transformation that's happening today. Mm-hmm. Part of the digitization of a firm involves the digitization of the customer data itself from different sources to automatically generate insights from their behavior. With digitization, banks can provide an enhanced customer experience. For the customer, this has resulted in a greater expectation for more timely and convenient means of managing their money and wealth. For the banks themselves, digitization means more data at a higher velocity. This scenario is challenging for the banking institutions to manage, to manage the inflows of data, forcing them to become more automated. Sure. Banks need to enhance the use of data efficiently to better service the clients, offering multiple client interaction channels that are timely, user-friendly across generations, and complete the task.
Yeah, I appreciate that overview. Let's unpack a little bit more and drill down to impact on small and medium banks. What would you say about that?
Well, I think with the advent of new technologies, a revolution in how customers engage with their finances is emerging. This has added a component of competitive landscape that neither small or large banks can ignore. For smaller institutions, however, this is an opportunity to compete on service and customization to their clients. As for the larger institutions, they can use a deep technology pockets to provide more advanced capabilities on a broader, almost commodity basis. This revolution is forcing the bank industry to rethink how they do business and delivering a unique and thorough customer experience to remain competitive. And, digitization is also an internal benefit and challenge for the banks, especially the smaller and medium-sized organizations. These institutions will benefit with more digital data available. Banks can take a data-driven approach to decision-making using digital analytics. Digitization and the need to increase a digitized presence and service will have a benefit and challenge. With increased convenience of online banking comes a decrease in human error and associated reduction in the time spent on corrective action. With more online services and transaction, cyber attackers will become more sophisticated, forcing banks to spend more time and money on protective solutions. Fraud and AML will become more difficult to detect, trace, and mitigate.
Yeah, and I want to circle back. You touched on challenges just in that previous statement. So double click on that for us. What are some of the challenges that these small and middle market banks face?
Well, I think you look at it and you kind of, from a small and medium bank, how do I allocate my spend on improving the digital experiment while at same time, experience, excuse me, while at the same time maintaining the regulatory adherence, client service, and security required to stay relevant. So it's an interesting dynamic. This dynamic is imperative to determine, as many reports show, that the digital channel will account for more bank revenue and is growing fast. Without the digital presence, the banks will be hard pressed to stay relevant for a long period of time. So to take advantage of this dynamic, banks have a few years to adapt. And in adapting, to be a leader and not a victim of this change. Banks must appreciate the magnitude of the opportunity and what it requires, but at the same time understand the gravity of the threat. I kind of think this is the mindset banks need to develop. They need to stop and think, what's my digital strategy from a holistic viewpoint, inclusive of data and how it is managed.
So with more people having greater access to this data, obviously, which results in much broader usage, what are the risks and benefits of the democratization of data? And I love the fact that I just worked in democratization into this podcast series, by the way. That's been a goal.
We're expanding our vocabulary as we go. It's I think it's a good question. As the digital age moves forward, data is becoming more and more abundant. That's one of the things about the digitization process, is data is just growing. And, the data that you're getting has to be relevant, and it's a source of risk, and users to make sure they are ready to manage this data onslaught. Here, this data is coming in waves, and people need to be able to manage it. And we've already seen the data revolution moving data, from the backroom chore to the front office necessity for competitive advantage. When I started in data in '97, we were the backroom guys building databases for, marketing. And we come out with these analytics, and everybody thought, wow, this is really cool. Go back in the room and hide, and we'll take care of it from here. We weren't part of the process. So the dynamic has really changed. But for firms with the means to manage the use of data effectively and efficiently, you got to provide the access to the right people at the right time, so that they have an intrinsic, if you do that, they will have an intrinsic competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. The challenge is getting the right people. Relevant data is becoming more complex and demanding. To manage more numerous data, firms need to make sure that they have the foundations right. The foundations are, you got to have the right processes. Those processes have to have the needed supporting solutions, and you need the resources ready to manage the data. It's still, reliant on people. Processes are for the governance of the data. The governance should include definition, lineage, and segmentation of the data. Those are some of the simple things you can think about.
Not sure that sounded so simple, but assuming that it did. What is the benefit of defining and segmenting the data that you mentioned?
Sure. I think, first of all, by defining the data and establishing its use and lineage, the users of the data have a baseline reference point to better understand the data. And if they understand the data, they'll use the data in a more consistent and intended manner for that data.
Right.
For small and medium banks, right, this is an exercise that does not require a complicated tool set, but is dependent upon you do need to establish a methodology for capturing the elements, designing and gaining a consensus around what they mean, how they're used, what their values should be and should not be. And once you establish that baseline terms and how they're defined, you have a process for maintaining and adding to that glossary going forward. Like you said, you kind of laughed, and it sounds, it's not overly complex. It's about consistency. This is a simple means of creating a governance framework that can be expanded without having a disruptive program that has long deployment and high costs. So I've seen many clients build these governance programs and they hire data stewards and specialists and so forth. You don't need to get into that, especially for the small and medium firms. Probably can do it with the knowledge workers you have today.
Right, but segmentation still playing a big part, as you mentioned. So let's expand on that a little bit. Why is segmentation so important?
Yeah, not to oversimplify things, but when you look at segmentation, it has two purposes really. You want to, you can segment by usage categories, and the second is categorized for regulatory and privacy concerns, right? By categorizing data, the right data can be provided to the appropriate users at the right time at the right level of scrutiny. By categorizing the data, the management of the larger data sets can be managed more effectively. So, for example, by identifying data that is used primarily for data marketing purposes, you can manage that for a lesser level of accuracy than you would data that is used for regulatory reporting, finance reporting. And with that lesser level of accuracy requirement, you can manage it with greater flexibility, knowing there are no regulatory consequences. And so, without those constraints, the marketing data can be run more quickly and with less oversight and scrutiny versus the financial data, which you're going to have to put more scrutiny on, but it's a smaller data set. And, if it's needed for regulatory purposes, you need to have that data, 98% accurate. And because there are reputational and regulatory consequences for data that's inaccurate or incomplete as part of that, right? Yep. So by getting the data to the right resources, by doing this, you can get the right data to the right resources for the deeper dive analytics that we talked about earlier for the competitive advantage. So this will allow for the extent, kind of the extension, refinement, and the use of data for that decision making. We see it today in that those banks that are using data for the analytics in a broad manner are leading with innovation. And in many areas, sales, product design, pricing, underwriting, and the design of differentiating customer experiences. And, the funny thing is, I was talking with a client yesterday, and pricing for risk is a big issue right now. And so, if you're doing the analytics and you understand the risk associated with the corporation, small company, fintech, the other small institutions you're doing business with, payment risk, credit risk is important, and you can bring that into your pricing methodology, which helps you, in the long run, if it's a loan or something like that, as you go forward.
Absolutely.
But with this approach, the risk and costs related to a broad use of data can be mitigated by recognizing, the benefits of the growth in the data.
Well, that's a great segue to my next question. So, Al, how do you think the banking industry can address the need for specialized resources and manage, external partnerships in the digitization process?
Well, Neal, I think this has become a challenge for firms that don't have a large staff of technologists. With the introduction of new tools like MDM, lineage, data quality, many new providers are offering a whole new set of products and means to support data management needs. Navigating these choices can be daunting for medium and small firms just because of the proliferation of choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about, navigation. So how can banks navigate the selection process in order to identify the right vendors for their specific organization and unique needs to them?
Yeah, I think the way we look at it and talk to clients approaching this is suggesting that they maintain their strategic functions within the company and finding partners for those non-strategic components. So a good way is to address, is what the firm, what do you want to identify yourself as? What do you want to be known in the market for? So, for example, customer service, innovative products, competitive pricing, and other options are things you may, what do you want to be known for to your clients in the bank, in the industry? And once you define yourself, our clients you can distinguish what you want to do internally and what they want and what you want to do through partnerships. So, so this makes identifying the partnerships and trusted advisors more critical than ever. Many medium-sized institutions cannot afford a full technical set of resources to develop, implement, and maintain digitized solutions, right? But in addition, managing and monitoring cyber activity can also be a cost challenge for some banks as well.
Right.
So for this reason, we suggest that banks develop a strategic approach to managing these operational functions through a set of internal controls and external partnerships based on, what's strategic and not strategic to them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And certainly internal controls near and dear to my heart. And I'm glad that you touched on the cost component, so when we stay with, and this is going to be a multi-part question, I'll just tell you, we're already over the 5, so I'm just going to group a couple together here, Al, so stay with me. For small and medium-sized financial firms, what is the requirement to meet the changing regulatory requirements? And also, how can they demonstrate that they are managing the data assets used in reporting effectively?
Right. I think, like most institutions, the requirement is to demonstrate that they are managing the data and have an auditable understanding of what happens to the data as it moves through the environment. I think that's really important. So because regulators and analysts alike are asking questions like, tell me, what does the data mean? Is it defined? How do you define it? And, what happens to the elements as they move through the environment? Is there a transformation? Is there, how is it getting to me in the format at the value that you provided to me? So not being able to provide evidence through documentation or a systematic approach raises questions as to the validity of the reporting provided to the regulators and the business users. So it's all about trust, right? So to demonstrate to the stakeholders that the data is managed and understood, data governance to be in place and supported by processes and some tools, but many small firms, that sounds like a pretty big task, pretty arduous task. But there are approaches that can be deployed to address the demands in a manner that kind of, I like to think when you're working with these firms, it makes sense. You have to do things. You just can't say, here's the cookie cutter approach, but what's the appropriate for your institution, considering their size, your complexity, and your market strategy.
Right. So let's end on that, Al. How can these firms address this requirement efficiently and effectively?
Well, I think that for smaller firms, they can rely on kind of think about things from a process-orientated approach that leverage. There are some simple tools out there, things like ServiceNow, Smartsheets, SharePoint, to name a few. And these frameworks, these platforms are really frameworks that facilitate the collaboration of the governance team. So, including any data stewards working on daily data issues. These applications provide a customizable framework that can provide the needed structure to manage the governance process without a heavy cost of implementing a big ERP solution or something of that nature. So, for example, within these solutions, you can develop a data glossary for reference by, the broad audience that needs access to your glossary, while only allowing a few people to administer what goes on within the glossary, edits, updates, changes, things like that. By using these solutions, the approach to data management is supported by a tool that helps institutionalize consistent processes, such as, change management. You got to make that consistent. Because they are highly customizable, they can be designed to manage several processes without the high levels of complexity and or cost. So, for the small to medium firm, keeping it simple, providing a clear value add, and bringing in the needed tools and documents accessible is essential to, a successful implementation.
I like it. Simple. The word of the day, Al. I really appreciate the discussion. Hope you had a good time joining us today on the podcast series.
No, this was great. Really appreciate the opportunity to have the discussion.
Yeah, well, you did an absolutely phenomenal job. I appreciate you, and thanks for taking a deep dive into a lot of important data management best practices. I know I learned a lot to take away here. And as always, I want to thank our audience for listening. We ask that you stay connected to Cherry Bekaert's channel as we release more podcasts later this spring and certainly into the summer. You can check us out at cbh.com/podcasts. And as always, we ask that you please like, share, and subscribe to the Risk and Accounting Advisory Podcast. And thanks so much again for listening.